I was different from a young age. Strange thoughts, unsettling drawings, questions no one could answer. Everything seemed under control, until my darkest fantasies became real. From as far back as I can remember, I was never like the other kids. While they drew houses, trees, and smiling families, my drawings were filled with shadows, figures tied up, eyes watching from the corners of the paper. Teachers would tilt their heads, ask me what the pictures meant, but I never gave them an answer. I didn't have to. To me, they felt natural, like they came from somewhere inside me I couldn't control. My parents noticed early. They thought it was just a phase, some strange imagination, but it never faded. I asked questions no child should ask, about death, about pain, about what it felt like to disappear. They tried to comfort me, to explain things in simple ways, but my mind always wanted to go deeper, darker. It worried them. I could see it in their faces, the way they exchanged looks when they thought I wasn't paying attention. They sent me to psychologists, one after another. Small rooms with shelves, full of toys, where adults asked me to explain my drawings, my thoughts, my dreams. I never told them the whole truth. I gave them pieces, enough to keep them busy, but never what really lived inside me. They thought I was just troubled, maybe lonely. No one understood that there was something in me I couldn't silence, something that grew stronger the more they tried to fix me. At home, my parents whispered at night. I would sit by the door, listening. "What if something is wrong with her?" my mother asked once, her voice trembling. My father didn't answer right away. That silence was worse than any words. It told me he feared the same thing. As I grew older, the questions in their eyes only deepened. Why me? Why their daughter? They wanted to believe I would outgrow it, that I would one day be normal. But I knew better. It was already part of me, and I carried it everywhere. Even as a child, I wasn't afraid of the darkness. I welcomed it. When I reached my teenage years, it seemed for a while like things were getting better. I laughed more, pretended to care about the same things other girls did, forced myself into the mold of someone ordinary. I wore makeup, went to parties, even joined conversations about music and crushes, though none of it mattered to me. I became skilled at blending in, at masking the shadows that still lingered in my mind. My parents wanted to believe I was changing. They smiled more, relaxed when teachers said I was quieter in class, more focused. They told themselves the years of therapy had finally worked, that I had grown out of it. I could feel the relief in them, like they had set down a weight they had carried for too long. What they didn't realize was that the weight had only shifted, from their shoulders onto mine. Inside, nothing had changed. My thoughts had simply become more organized, more deliberate. The fantasies that once spilled out as crude drawings were now carefully constructed stories I played over and over in my mind. Scenarios of control, of power, of making people bend, under my will. I didn't speak of them anymore, not to my parents, not to doctors, not to anyone. I learned the art of silence, and in that silence, my mind grew sharper. There were times I caught myself staring too long at someone in class, not out of attraction, but out of curiosity, wondering how easily I could break them, how quickly. I could take away everything they took for granted. I never acted on it, of course, not then. But the thoughts became a constant presence, like a second heartbeat. My parents saw only the mask, never the truth. They thought I was finally becoming the daughter they had always wanted. I let them believe it, because it was easier that way. It gave me space. It gave me freedom. What none of them understood was that this wasn't healing. It was preparation. The storm inside me hadn't passed. It was waiting, biding its time, until the moment came when I would finally let it out. It didn't take long for me to find people who matched the parts of me I had been hiding. At first, they seemed like any other group of reckless teenagers. Loud, careless, always pushing boundaries. They weren't afraid of trouble, and I was drawn to that recklessness like a moth to fire. They smoked behind the school gym, drank cheap bottles in the park after dark, stole small things from stores just to feel the rush. It started with little, axe things most would brush off as typical teenage rebellion, but for me it was more. Every time I stole something, every time I drank until the world blurred, I felt a piece of myself clicking into place. It wasn't rebellion. It was liberation. With them, I didn't have to pretend. They liked my edge, my sharpness, the way I didn't flinch at things that scared others. Fights broke out sometimes, and I didn't hesitate to join in. Violence came naturally, like an instinct I had always been waiting to use. When I struck someone, I felt alive in a way nothing else could match. It wasn't long before the police became a part of my life. Petty thefts, public drinking, vandalism, they dragged me to the station more than once. Each time my parents came to pick me up, faces pale, hearts breaking. They asked what had happened to me, but they didn't understand it had always been there. I hadn't changed. I was just no longer hiding. Eventually, I was assigned a probation. Officer, meetings, lectures, warnings, none of it mattered. The more they tried to control me, the more I pulled away. They thought the threat of juvenile detention would scare me straight. But to me, it was just another empty cage, another set of walls. My parents were falling apart. My mother cried at night, believing she had failed me. My father tried to stay strong, but his silence said everything. They asked themselves what they had done wrong, why their daughter was like this. They didn't know that their questions had no answers. Some things can't be explained, can't be fixed, and still, none of them realized the truth. Everything so far had only been a prelude. The fights, the thefts, the nights in police custody, they were distractions, warm-up acts before the real performance. Because deep inside, the fantasies I carried as a child had returned. Stronger, clearer, hungrier than ever. And soon, I would give in to them completely. There was a boy at school I could never stand. He didn't like me either. Maybe he sensed what I was beneath the surface. Or maybe he just enjoyed making my life difficult. He threw comments in the hallway, rolled his eyes when I spoke, smirked at me in ways that made my blood boil. To everyone else, it was just another teenage rivalry. Two people who couldn't get along. But to me, it was more. He became a symbol of everything I hated, of people who thought they were untouchable, who believed they could treat me like I was less. The more I thought about him, the stronger the obsession grew. At night, I replayed arguments in my head, but they always ended differently than in real life. In my mind, I was in control. I made him powerless, silent, no longer smirking, no longer laughing. Those thoughts no longer frightened me. They gave me a sense of calm, like I finally knew what I needed to do. When I heard I might be sent to a juvenile detention center, it didn't scare me. If anything, it made me restless. I couldn't let that happen before I finished what I had started in my mind. I needed to act before time ran out. I began to plan, carefully, quietly. I thought about where, when, and how. I considered the mistakes others had made, the things I had read in books and seen on the news. I wasn't going to be reckless. If I was going to do this, it had to be clean. Perfect. I found an ally, one of the friends I had made in my reckless group. He had a car, and more importantly, he was easily influenced. He didn't know the full extent of what I was planning, not at first. I told him I wanted to teach the boy a lesson, scare him, make him regret the things he had said to me. My friend laughed, thought it was a prank, and agreed to help. He didn't realize how serious I was. Slowly, I gathered what I needed: rope, tape, little things that could fit into a bag without anyone asking questions. Every piece of the puzzle made my heart race. It was no longer just fantasy. It was becoming real. When the day finally came, I felt no fear, only focus. Everything around me faded into background noise. My parents' disappointment, my probation officer's warnings, the threat of detention. None of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the plan. And the boy who thought I couldn't touch him was about to learn how wrong he was. The day I chose felt almost ordinary. The sky was gray, the air heavy, the kind of weather that made people rush home without noticing much around them. Perfect. Ordinary days hide extraordinary things. I watched him all week, studying his routine. The way he lingered after school, the path he walked, the times he was alone. Every detail became part of the blueprint in my mind. By the time Friday came, I knew exactly when and where to strike. My friend pulled up in the car, music low, nerves obvious. He still thought it was just a joke, a scare, something harmless. I didn't correct him. His ignorance was useful. When the boy finally appeared, everything inside me went still. Not chaotic, not panicked, calm, focused, as if my whole life had been leading to this single point. I waited until he passed the spot I had chosen, then moved. It happened faster than even I imagined. A shove, a grip, the sudden shock in his eyes. He struggled, but I was ready. Rope, tape, movements I had rehearsed in my head countless times now played out like muscle memory. My friend hesitated, but under my orders he followed through. Fear made him obedient. We dragged him into the car, his muffled sounds filled the space, panic vibrating against the taped silence. My friend's hands shook on the wheel as I gave directions. He asked once if we were going too far, his voice small, but one look from me ended the question. He drove. The road into the forest was long and empty, branches scraping against the car as if nature itself disapproved. We stopped deep inside, where no one came, the kind of place where screams would dissolve into nothing. We pulled him out, his body thrashing, but weaker now. Adrenaline had drained from him, leaving fear. We tied him to a tree, the rope biting into his wrists, his ankles, bound so tightly he couldn't move. His eyes found mine, wide and pleading. That look, the shift from arrogance to desperation, was everything I had wanted. For a moment, I just stared at him. In that silence, I felt powerful, untouchable. The control I had fantasized about for years was finally mine. Then I turned away. We left him there, bound and helpless, swallowed by the shadows of the forest. The drive back was quiet. My friend's face was pale, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He didn't speak, and neither did I. There was nothing left to say. The next day, his face was everywhere. On posters, on social media, in whispered conversations at school. A missing boy. A mystery. And as I watched people panic, cry, and search, one thought settled deep inside me. They would never suspect me that by the next morning the world had changed. Not for me, but for everyone else. His face was plastered on missing posters around town, his name spoken with worry, whispered as though saying it too loudly might make the truth more real. Parents clutched their children closer, teachers held meetings, and the police swarmed the streets. I remember seeing the first flyer taped to a lamppost on my walk to school. The photo they chose showed him smiling, carefree. It didn't match the face I had left behind in the forest, twisted with fear, eyes wide with the realization that he was not in control anymore. That contrast was almost amusing. Everyone else mourned the boy in the picture. I could only think of the boy tied to the tree. At school, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Whispers followed every hallway, rumors spreading faster than facts. Some students cried openly, others speculated endlessly, each one trying to piece together what had happened. And I was there among them, nodding, pretending to care, letting my voice tremble with concern when it needed to. I became part of the crowd, invisible in plain sight. My parents, though, noticed something different. Not about me, they thought I was simply shaken like everyone else, but about the community. The way police cruisers circled the neighborhood, the way reporters knocked on doors, searching for a quote, a story, anything. My mother wrung her hands in the kitchen, whispering prayers under her breath. My father stayed silent, his jaw tight, his eyes distant. They had no idea their daughter had been the one to set all of this in motion. Nights were the hardest. I lay awake, replaying the sound of his muffled cries, the weight of his body as we dragged him, the sight of him tied and powerless. But it wasn't guilt that kept me awake. It was exhilaration. My mind churned with the memory, each detail fueling me like fire. I had stepped into my fantasies and made them real, and nothing else in the world could compare. My friend, however, wasn't coping the same way. His silence grew heavier each day. He avoided me at school, his laughter gone, replaced with nervous glances and restless fidgeting. I knew he was unraveling, and part of me enjoyed watching it happen. He thought we had left the boy without a trace. He didn't understand how thin the line was between safety and discovery. And yet, despite all the panic, all the searching, no one looked at me. No one suspected the quiet girl who once sat in the back of therapy offices drawing monsters. To them, I was just another student, another face in the crowd, but I knew the truth. I had crossed the line, and I could never go back. Days turned into weeks, and the boy was still missing. His name echoed in every conversation, his picture stared from every wall, his story played on every television screen. The entire town seemed to breathe his absence. Search parties combed the woods, volunteers with flashlights and dogs spread through the night. I watched them from a distance, blending into the crowd, pretending to be just another worried face. At home, my parents grew more tense by the day. My mother jumped every time the phone rang, convinced it would be news, good or bad. My father barely spoke anymore. But when he did, his words carried the weight of a man who feared the world was collapsing around him. They had no idea the collapse had begun inside their own house, but it wasn't just the town that was cracking. My friend was unraveling faster than I had expected. His hands shook constantly, his eyes darted around as though shadows held answers. He couldn't meet my gaze anymore. When the police interviewed students asking questions about the boy's last known whereabouts, I answered calmly, steady. But when they questioned him, his voice stumbled, his face turned pale. I knew it was only a matter of time before someone noticed his fear. And fear leads to mistakes. One night, he showed up at my door, uninvited, trembling. He told me he couldn't sleep, that he kept hearing the boy's cries in his head. His voice was broken, his words frantic. He wanted to go to the police, to confess, to end it. I listened quietly, but inside, anger burned. He didn't understand. Confession meant weakness. Confession meant destroying everything I had built. Reminded him of what would happen if he spoke, how both of us would go down. How prison wasn't just a story, but a reality waiting to swallow him whole. His fear kept him silent that night, but I knew it wouldn't last. Meanwhile, investigators were getting closer. Rumors spread that the police had found evidence in the woods, footprints maybe, or a piece of rope. Nothing certain, nothing public. But I could feel the pressure tightening, like a noose around my own neck. And yet, even as the danger grew, so did the thrill. Knowing I had walked into their search grounds and left my mark without being caught made me feel untouchable. Every time the police came to school, I felt a rush. Every glance, every question, every clipboard filled with notes. They had no idea the person they were hunting sat right in front of them, smiling faintly, hiding in plain sight. But the weakest link was beside me. My friend's silence was breaking. His guilt was a ticking bomb, and when bombs go off, they don't just destroy the person holding them. They destroy everything around them. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of day that felt painfully ordinary, until it wasn't. At school, the police showed up again. This time they weren't just asking questions, they were watching. Sitting in the cafeteria, scanning faces, listening to conversations. Their presence turned the air heavy. Students whispered nervously, some too loudly, speculating about suspects, possible sightings, anything. I sat with my tray of untouched food, calm on the outside, but inside I studied every move my friend made. He was falling apart. His hands shook so badly he spilled water all over the table. His eyes darted between the officers, his breath shallow, uneven. I knew it. He was going to break. That night, he called me. His voice was frantic, words tumbling out in a rush. He said he couldn't take it anymore, that the guilt was crushing him, that he wanted to end it all, either by confessing or by disappearing in another way. His panic bled through every word, and I realized I had reached a crossroads. If he confessed, everything ended. My secret, my freedom, the power I had claimed, gone. Everything I had built inside me would collapse in an instant. So I decided, if the weakest link couldn't hold, it had to be cut away. The plan came quickly, almost naturally. I told him to meet me, that I had an idea to fix everything, to ease his fear. He trusted me still, despite the storm tearing him apart. That trust was his final mistake. When we met, his face was pale, his eyes red from sleepless nights. He spoke in broken sentences, desperate, clinging to me as though I was the only thing holding him together. He didn't realize I was the one about to pull him apart. The moment came fast. A shove, a strike, the silence of the night swallowing his surprise. Fear flashed in his eyes, the same fear I had seen in the boy's eyes in the forest. For a second, I felt a rush, the same power, the same thrill. And then he was gone. No more weakness, no more risk. The next day, whispers spread again, but this time about my friend. He hadn't shown up to school, hadn't returned home. People thought he had run away, unable to deal with the pressure of the investigation. The police added his name to the growing chaos, another mystery to solve. And me? I smiled faintly, blending back into the noise, because once again, no one suspected me. But deep inside, I knew something had changed. Silencing him wasn't just about survival, it awakened something darker, something hungrier. I had removed the threat, but I had also crossed another line, one I wasn't sure I could ever step back from. With my friend gone, the streets felt different. Lighter, somehow. Less risk around me. And yet, I couldn't shake the tension. The invisible eyes of the world seemed to follow me everywhere I went. Every glance from a teacher, every whisper in the hallways, every patrol car driving by, reminded me that the world was on edge, searching for answers I alone held. The thrill of what I had done burned inside me. I was untouchable, a ghost among the living, and the power of that knowledge made everything else fade into insignificance. I began to watch people more carefully, noticing small habits, little vulnerabilities. The more I observed, the more I realized how easily the world could be manipulated, if one only had the patience, the cunning, and the nerve to act. The investigation pressed on. Police scoured the forests again, questioned neighbors, friends, anyone connected to the boy and my former friend. Every day the tension grew heavier. Footsteps behind me, casual questions from strangers. My heart raced in ways that were no longer fear, but excitement. Each moment felt like a test, a game I was winning. And yet, even as I basked in the feeling of control, cracks began to appear. Little things, small errors, a footprint left on muddy ground, a conversation overheard, a suspicious glance my way. All reminders that perfection was fragile. My mind was always alert, scanning for threats, anticipating mistakes, calculating next moves. The pressure of keeping everything hidden became intoxicating, addictive. Even at home, the tension was palpable. My parents had no idea what I had done, but they felt it somehow. My mother's constant worry, my father's silent dread. I could see the unspoken question in their eyes. Why her? Why did this happen to our family? They would never know the truth, and I made sure of it. The boy in the forest, the friend I silenced. Their absence was a constant reminder of the power I wielded, but also of the danger I courted. One misstep, one observation too much, one curious question from a stranger, and everything could unravel. And the deeper I sank into that power, the more I realized it wasn't just about control over others anymore. It was about control over myself, my fantasies, my impulses, the darkness that had grown inside me since childhood. I was walking a line that could vanish at any moment, and I didn't want to stop. The fall didn't come with a bang. It came, quietly, unexpectedly, like the snap of a thin branch underfoot. The police had been watching closer than I realized. Little mistakes I thought insignificant. A footprint, a trace of rope fibers, a slight hesitation in my story, all began to form a picture in their minds. Evidence was stacking, and my invisibility was slipping. It was my friend's absence that finally triggered the net. His sudden disappearance had raised new alarms, led investigators to revisit old statements, and piece together connections they had missed before. Every step I had taken, every careful plan, every hidden trace, began to narrow the gap between freedom and capture. The day they came for me, it was over almost before I understood. Officers appeared at the door, calm but determined. My parents screamed, begging for answers I couldn't give. My world, which had seemed untouchable for so long, shattered in seconds. As I was led away, handcuffed, I felt no anger, no fear, only a strange detachment. This was the consequence of the life I had chosen. The power, the control, the thrill. All of it had been real, but fleeting. The reality of consequences, cold and final, settled over me like a weight I couldn't shake. Sitting in the interrogation room, I finally faced the enormity of what I had done. The boy in the forest, the friend I silenced, my parents' broken faces. All reminders that nothing could be undone. Guilt surfaced, faint at first, then growing, an ache that pulsed beneath my skin. Not for the thrill, not for the power, but for the lives I had destroyed and the innocence I had taken from myself. I realized then that life wouldn't return to normal. I wouldn't return to normal. The past, every choice, every dark thought, had built a prison far larger than these walls. And yet, even as the truth closed in, part of me clung to that darkness, the part that had always driven me. It had shaped me, guided me, made me who I was. And it would follow me, even behind bars. I had fallen, yes. But the girl who had planned, executed, and controlled, that part of me would never truly disappear.